Good evening and welcome to Crawley Borough Council's Overview and Scrutiny Commission meeting of the 28th of September 2020. As this is the first meeting since the AGM, I'd like to welcome our new councillors onto the Commission tonight and also welcome members of the press and public watching this meeting live. I am Councillor Tina Belbin, Chair of the Overview and Scrutiny Commission. As this meeting is being held virtually in public and is not a face-to-face meeting, there will be no public question time at any council meeting while virtual committee meetings are being held. So I'd like to stress the public and press can still hear and see the meeting, but public speaking has been suspended and any written questions submitted in advance that were deemed acceptable by the councillor's monitoring officer will be read out as answered. There will be no supplementary questions. The agenda for this meeting is published and is available on the Council's website. For any committee meeting held virtually, all voting will be held by a recorded vote taken by a Democratic Services team member on behalf of the Chair. The exceptions to this are the approving of the minutes from the previous meeting or any other procedure item where the item's sole recommendation to the committee is on a note the report. For those items, the Chair will move the item and it will be presumed agreed unless dissenting comment from any committee member is made. Before I invite members of the Commission to confirm their attendance, I ask that they please ensure their mobile phones are switched off or are on silent, their backgrounds are plain or nondescript, and they are aware of their surroundings, that they're not disturbed during the meeting. This includes making sure all TVs, radios, smartphones, speakers and pets are switched off, please. Committee members are reminded that they should have their microphones turned off unless speaking and their cameras turned off unless they are requesting to speak. When asked to speak, please turn your camera on, unmute yourself and pause for 3 seconds to allow the slight time connection delay. With this in mind, Commission members are asked to be aware of who they will follow in the voting process and prepare accordingly. May I ask the officers supporting this meeting to introduce themselves, given their name and job title.
Chris Fedlow, Democratic Services Manager.
Heather Girling, Democratic Services Officer. And I'd like to add, Chair, we've received apologies from Councillor Brenda Smith for item 5.
Thank you. We will now be taking introductions together with items 2 and 3. Please can I ask committee members, when called upon, to confirm their name and the ward they represent, if they have any declarations of interest and whipping declarations to make, if they agree with the minutes of the meeting of the Overview and Scrutiny Commission held on the 22nd of June 2020.
Councillor Marion Aylings. You're muted, Councillor.
Okay, this is Councillor Ayling. I'm the board member for Newbush and North Broadfield, and I don't have any declaration of interest. Thank you. Oh, and I agree the minutes.
Councillor Belbin.
I am Councillor Tina Belbin and I represent Pound Hill North and Forge Wood. I have no declarations of interest or whipping declarations to make, and I agree the minutes of the Overview and Scrutiny Commission held on the 22nd of June.
Councillor Bob Burgess.
I'm Councillor Bob Burgess, Councillor for Three Bridges. No whipping declarations, no declarations of interest, and I agree the minutes.
Councillor Richard Barrett.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Richard Barrett, Councillor for Pound Hill North and Forge Wood Ward. I declare a personal non-prejudicial interest in item 8 as a member of West Sussex County Council. With regard to the minutes of the meeting held on the 22nd of June, I'm happy to agree those as an accurate record, but there is one slight amendment that needs to be made. I think Democratic Services officers will recall this because I raised it in advance of the last full council meeting. It's if you look at pages 5 and 6 of the agenda where the disclosures of interest are listed. There are 4 disclosures of interest from county councillors present relating to the EV charging infrastructure network, which say minute 7 in brackets. If you then turn over to page 6, you've got the same 4 declarations relating to minute 8, and it actually says EV charging infrastructure network again. It should actually say the local cycling and walking infrastructure plan, which was minute 8. So it's those 4 references under minute 8 which just need to be changed. I know they were changed before council. Yeah. So sorry to be pedantic, but I thought I'd point it out.
Oh, thank you for that, Councillor Barrett. I will get we will get the minutes changed.
Thanks.
Councillor Lanza.
Councillor Bob Lanza, member of Pendlington and Worth Ward. No whipping declaration. I'll declare a personal interest in item 8, health and adult social care select committee as a member of Crawley, West Sussex County Council. And I agree the minutes of the Overview and Scrutiny Commission of 22nd of June.
Councillor Malik. Apologies. It's Councillor Malik on the call. He appears not to, so we'll come back to him. Councillor McElhaney. Okay. Councillor Pendlington.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Councillor Alison Pendlington, Pound Hill South and Worth Ward. I have no disclosures of interest or whipping declarations, and I'm very happy to agree the minutes of the meeting on the 22nd of June. Thank you.
Councillor Rana.
Good evening, everyone. I am Councillor Tahira Rana and I represent Broadfield South. I don't have any whipping or declarations interest to declare, and I agree with the minutes of the 22nd June. Thank you.
Councillor Sharma.
I'm Councillor Raj Sharma from Southgate. I have no whipping or declaration of interest to declare. I suppose the minutes are correct because I'm a new member, so I take it and agree with everybody else that they must be correct.
And just for the purpose of record, Councillor Lamb and Councillor Brenda Burgess are also on the call. They're not commission members, but just so they're recorded. If you bear with us, we just have a technical issue with the chair, so we're just trying to get her back. Her camera seems to have failed.
It's there. Is it there? That button there. No.
I will just check if either Councillor Tom McElhaney or Councillor Malik are on the call, because we did check them first. Can you just confirm neither of them are there? They don't appear to be. We're just going to just one more check of Councillor Belbin's camera. Councillor Rana, can you put your camera on, please? Because you might have to do some of the chairing. Bear with me. Councillor Rana, can you hear?
I can, Chris. Thank you.
Okay, if you bear with me, would you move the minutes, please, Councillor Rana?
Okay. I moved the minutes of sorry, what page is it am I looking at, Chris? Sorry about that.
Page 3.
Oh, page 3. Okay, thank you. Okay, I moved the minutes of the Commission's following minutes of the Cabinet 25th. No, that's not it. Is it 25th November 2020 I'm looking at? So I really don't know what I'm looking at. It says to consider, provisional list of reports for the Commission's following minutes on page 3. And that's Cabinet 25th November 2020, 13 January 2021.
Page
and
5.
Cabinet, okay, page 5, that's it. Oh, thank you, of course, yes. So I move the minutes of the Overview and Scrutiny Commission on the Monday, the 22nd June 2020. And this all seems to be approved by everyone.
There was a correction by Councillor Barrett. Can I have just confirmed that no other members, that all the Commission members just are happy to agree the amendment Councillor Barrett made? So any dissenting voices, please?
Agreed.
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 For
Agreed. Agreed.
if you, okay, Chair, Councillor Rana, you need to go to the public questions.
Okay, now we come. Is there any questions by? It's just I don't really have the report in front of me. But what do I go on number?
Chair, there's just to confirm that there's been no written questions, so there's no supplementary. So we can move on to the next item. If we move on to the public protection item.
Okay, the public. Okay, so now we go to agenda number. Item number 5. And this is Public Spaces Protection Order, alcohol consumption. And I would like to invite the officers to please present your report. So if officers, would you please present your report? Thank you.
Councillor Peter Lamb.
Peter Lamb, please present your report. Thank you.
Hi, I'm stepping in for the officers in this one. This is the Public Space Protection Order proposal related to alcohol consumption. Members will be aware that as a local authority, we can pass orders which ban certain sorts of behaviour within the sort of boundaries of the borough on issues which we view as being antisocial behaviour, and where we can have single sort of fixed penalty notices and various other sort of penalties attached to breaching that order. The proposal for this one is in relation to alcohol consumption in public areas. It doesn't ban alcohol consumption, but it does mean that if someone is undertaking antisocial behaviour in those areas, that the police are able to confiscate the alcohol in the event that they are behaving in that way. This is not actually a new order. I think a lot of the debate around this appears to be discussing what would happen if we introduce something like this. To be clear, this is already introduced, but we're required to every so often re-debate it and decide if it is still necessary. An order of this sort has been in place in Crawley now since 2006. So this is very much what the established position is. And certainly when we've consulted with the public and with the police and other bodies, they're very clear that this power is useful in being able to tackle some of the issues which we face in the town. So we're coming today to the OSC to ask for your support in maintaining the current public space protection order that we have in place. Tina, your mic's off.
Yeah. Thank you for your report. The process for discussion on the report will be as follows. Any Commission member wishing to speak should turn on their camera. This will signify to the Democratic Services Officer your request to speak. You will then be invited to speak one by one. When you are called on to speak, please unmute your microphone and check that your screen is surrounded by a red box before speaking, pausing for 3 seconds to allow for the time delay. Please turn off your camera and microphone when you have finished speaking and are no longer live. All Commission members who have indicated will be called on to ask a question in turn, with officers responding to any queries raised. If there are any proposed amendments to the recommendation, then please propose these when providing comments. We will now begin the consideration of the report. Please turn on your camera if you wish to speak. No? No?
Or Councillor Burgess. Councillor Bob Burgess.
Thank you very much indeed. I've read the report. Are there any changes in the report compared with what currently exists? I heard what Councillor Lamb said about the this being in place since 2006, but are there any changes from the latest edition that we have to the one that is being proposed? If there are, I would welcome hearing what they are, because I couldn't find them in the report. Thank you.
Councillor Lamb.
I don't believe there are any changes to the current arrangements. I could be wrong about that, and if so, then I'd hope. Well, I noticed that the Deputy Chief Executive just turned his mic on, so maybe I'm about to be corrected on that. But this very much seems to be in line with what we already have in place.
If I may just to confirm that this is a rollover of the continuing powers. There's nothing new in here.
Councillor Barrett.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Well, similarly, I fully support this. As Councillor Lamb said, it's simply rolling over what we have already. It's worked already, and I think the evidence of the last few years in the town centre, sadly, has been that we do need these powers and that they are effective. So I would fully support it. I did have one or two detailed questions, if I may. I don't know if Ian would be able to answer these. They're just points of interest really out of the report. The first one is, and we probably were told this some years ago when it was agreed, can somebody remind me why it doesn't include Gatwick Airport? The second one is on paragraph 4.7, where it's talking about consultation. It says the requirement to consult with the owner or occupier of land within the proposed restricted area does not apply to land that is owned and occupied by the local authority. I didn't quite understand why that was the case. And then it talks about only consulting where it's reasonably practical to do so. And I'm thinking, given the multiplicity of land ownership in the town, I wonder how we do that, or do we simply assume that because we're carrying out a general consultation that any owner or occupier would be included in that? And finally, and I suppose it's along the same lines, 6.4 talks about the PSPO not restricting the consumption of alcohol in any premises that are licensed for the supply of alcohol other than council operated licensed premises. And again, I wondered why there was a distinction for council owned or operated licensed premises. Oh, and sorry, and the other thing to say, I haven't made a note of them, but looking through the order itself, there were one or two very minor typos. So perhaps that could just be given a final proofreading before it's actually read and see.
So I'm going to rely upon the Deputy Chief to provide on some of this. My understanding around Gatwick is actually a large part of Gatwick we can't impose a PSPO over, because it's technically, once you get past the gates, it becomes international territory. And actually there are major problems with licensing issues up there, and there's been a part of national debate around that. I also believe there are other rules relating to the rest of the airport which currently provide a certain amount of protection. Truth be told, I'm not sure what the difference is in terms of council land. I hope there's something which Deputy Chief Exec can advise on. But in terms of the consultation, so long as we put it open to public consultation, it meets the technical legal requirements for creating a PSPO, and very much bear in mind the circumstances at the moment where you might want to do something a bit more, go out, have conversations with people and various client groups. Clearly in current circumstances it's not practical, so consultation very much, and for work reasons I've had to look at every consultation currently in operation by a council. I can tell you that the standard approach has very much just been having a sort of a web survey on your council website as opposed to something more detailed.
Okay, thank you.
In terms of how it's different on local authority land, my understanding is that it would just create a bit of a nonsense if you were trying to enforce something on your own land and seeking consultation from yourself. It basically delays it. There's a kind of an assumed authority in that perspective that you're going ahead. So I think you know, it's probably trying to explain the process to an nth degree in the report, but that's the reasoning, I suspect.
Thanks. And the reference in 6.4, is that the same?
Yeah, that would be my understanding. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Burgess.
Councillor Burgess, did you have a question?
I do. It's about the fixed penalty notices. It says that on one of the recommendation 2.2b, the level of fixed penalty notices which may be issued for a breach of the PSPO be set at £100. What happens if the person who is in breach of the PSPO cannot afford the £100? Does the matter then get escalated further on up the line, or is it just so simply written off? Because if it is simply just written off because the person is not in a position to be able to pay, so for instance, they may be a very poor person, a homeless person, and so on, who is in breach. If they cannot afford to pay, what's the point of issuing the notice in the first place?
Muted. Councillor.
God, it happens to everyone, doesn't it? In theory, if you violate a PSPO, you can escalate it to a magistrate's court for further sort of more harsh sort of penalties. In practice, you're not really going to do that unless it's likely to produce a positive outcome, and it's really going to be up to the police when enforcing to decide what the most appropriate approach is. The reality is that the main restriction here for particularly those who are on low income but drinking in public areas is the confiscation of the alcohol in those areas. So that's essentially what has worked in the past. They take the alcohol away, and it sort of encourages people, if they're going to be consuming in that way, out of those areas and to maintain a pattern of good behaviour. But I guess there's always going to be these issues that you do tend to find ASB. You know, you can issue penalties for things, but if people can't afford to pay them, is it really a restriction? I'd say in that immediate moment where the alcohol is the thing which they really want, taking the alcohol away probably is a restriction. It's certainly better than not having that ability in place. We can't enforce anything more comprehensive than that. It's not within our powers as a local authority, but it's another tool that we enable the police to use as they try and tackle what is a very difficult social set of problems.
Okay, thank you for that.
Councillor Aylings.
Yeah, can I just say to Bob that we had a problem in Bewbush and we confiscated, I didn't, but the police confiscated the alcohol. When it was obvious that they weren't going to be able to afford a fine, we just kept taking the alcohol away, which meant in effect they had to go and buy more, which was to them that was their fine. And it has stopped in Bewbush, so it has worked. Thank you.
I'd just like to Councillor Sharman.
Thank you. I'm looking at 6.11 and looking at some of those figures, and it gives the impression that in the year ending 31st of May, the increase from previous years of orders and ASB were only about 7. But if we take into account that end of March, April and May was total lockdown, are we to presume that this in reality it is only a 10-month period we are referring to? And in fact, sort of had there been continuation for the next 2 months, the figures would have been much higher?
Yeah, I mean, you can't really extrapolate from these things because you're not really sure what's going to happen. What would have happened if things had remained normal. What I would say is we know that there's been quite a substantial increase in antisocial behaviour as a result of the high pressure conditions around the lockdown. People, when they finally get out into public areas, there was large amounts of antisocial drinking taking place particularly in sort of play areas and public parks, which we know that the police were struggling to deal with. So in some ways, I'd actually say that the conditions of the lockdown were more likely to have produced antisocial behaviour associated with the use of alcohol, because people had more time on their hands, and that was how they were using it. But we can't really gather what. It's usually not very helpful to try and gauge things from year to year, because you're going to have natural fluctuations taking place. You want to see what the long-term trend is in dealing with these things. And we know that there has been a problem the last couple of years in the town with some of this stuff that we've been trying to work with partner agencies to deal with. But no, I wouldn't say that was just 10 months. I'd say that very much includes that full 12-month period. And it'd be very interesting to see what happens with the next 12-month cycle, whether or not, despite the lockdowns, that could actually be a much higher figure. It potentially could be.
Thank you, Peter.
Councillor Rana.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Chair. I just want to ask it's just that just when the lockdown was easing in just about June time, my next door neighbours, they invited some people around, must have been about 10 at that time, just outside the front garden, and they were actually drinking. And they died on 2 occasions, which wasn't really, I mean, I didn't like it because I live right next to them. And should I have actually reported them to the police? Maybe if they do it again. I mean, is that something that they shouldn't be doing, actually drinking? I mean, literally, it is drinking in the streets, in the front garden, or even outside the front garden. So, I mean, that's all I wanted to ask, Peter. I mean, should I really, if they're doing next time, can I actually report them?
I mean, drinking is not in itself illegal. Certainly, if they're drinking in their own front garden, then that wouldn't be a problem at all. In fact, this certainly wouldn't apply under those circumstances. And if they're drinking in a public area, we accept that people can go to the park and sort of have alcohol there. It's where it's combined with antisocial behaviour, that's where it becomes an offence. So if they are behaving in a way that is, reasonably, the average person would say was antisocial behaviour, and they're drinking, then you could report them. But the act of drinking itself is not, outside is not itself grounds for a fixed penalty notice or for the confiscation of their alcohol. It's very much tied with the other things, because we know that alcohol can fuel antisocial behaviour, and so having that ability to de-escalate some of that is very helpful.
Okay, thank you, Peter.
It's probably also worth stating that the PSPO is a public space protection order, and therefore it's focused on shared spaces rather than private spaces. That said, if someone was drinking and creating kind of antisocial behaviour, and you thought it was reportable, there are other mechanisms for taking action on that.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for their comments. I would just like to say that I'd like to thank the officers for the report. I think they've done very well to get the level of feedback that they have, given that we haven't been able to have any face-to-face meetings. I'd also like to add that it might be quite interesting in the future to know the time of day that we get the problem with the alcohol, and whether it is late at night when the clubs and pubs are open too late, or whether it's earlier on in the evening. So maybe that's something we could look at in the future. All commission members have now had opportunity to speak, so we will move on to the recommendation. I move that the Commission notes the report and requests that the views expressed during the debate are fed back to Cabinet through the Commission's comment sheet, and ask that the Vice Chair second. Councillor Rana, can you second, please?
Yes, of course, Councillor Chair. I second that.
Thank you. Is that agreed?
Agreed.
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 Thank you. The recommendations as set out in the report have been approved. We will now move to the Budget Monitoring Q1 report from Karen Hayes, Head of Corporate Finance. Please, can I ask Councillor Peter Lamb, Leader of the Council, to introduce and present the report to the Commission. Thank you.
Yes, me again, unfortunately, and certainly a very unfortunate report to be presenting. Members will be aware that every February we set a budget as a council, setting out how we plan to spend money over the following 12-month period. As one of the checks against that, we have quarterly budget monitoring, which are reports which come before all members to look at how the actual expenditure has taken place over that quarter. And usually it's a good opportunity for me to highlight the ways in which the council is managing to keep developing a surplus in that period, is keep being able to deal with the deficit that is often incurred as a result of a cut in our funding, and make it up instead with sort of revenue growth and things of that nature. This report is very, very different. This sets out the first quarter of the budget for this council year. And as members will clearly see on the second page of the report, we have a deficit this quarter of 1.2 million. That is despite receiving 1.5 million in that time frame from the government to try and make up some of the difference. This is directly related to the pandemic, which we are currently having to deal with. A significant change has happened to council finance, particularly for district level authorities like Crawley over the last 10 years, where we've had a much greater emphasis on generating revenue locally, and consequently, when things are required to shut down, as they were in the lockdown, we've experienced a much harsher cut in our revenue than otherwise might have been the case. We need to be clear, this is not going to be the end of it in terms of the 1.2 million loss this quarter. Certainly there will be further deficits in subsequent quarters, particularly if we're required to go back into lockdown, which will drastically affect our income, particularly if we are unable to get decent agreements with our suppliers of services like K2 and the Hawk, who are within law trying to claim certain arrangements in terms of us compensating them for closures. So we could potentially be dealing with much harsher problems than has been set out in this report, and as members will be aware from the seminar which we had last week. While that deals with the immediate problems thrown up from the coronavirus pandemic, of course, members need to be aware that it's not just going to be about this budget year. It will be ongoing, particularly because of the knock-on effect we've seen in terms of the reduction of business activity in the town, which takes us out of being a very high-performing authority to being in the safety net. There's about a £2 million ongoing loss that we've essentially faced there. And members of the public increasingly being falling into the nets where they can claim council tax benefits. That is having a very significant impact and will go on having a significant impact upon our funding in future years. So we are going to have some very difficult choices to take. And while the immediate pressures on the budget have been resolved to some extent through working out, through use of reserves and through working out in-year savings that can be made, people need to be conscious that this council is going to have to undertake some very serious savings in the next couple of years if it is going to keep its head above water as a result of what has happened earlier this year.
Thank you for the report. The process for discussion will be as before. Each committee member will have the opportunity to speak. Please indicate by turning your camera on. When you are called on to speak, please unmute your microphone and check that you are live before making your comments. Pausing for 3 seconds to allow for the time delay. Once you have spoken, please ensure your camera is turned off and you mute your microphone. Thank you. We will now begin consideration of the report.
Councillor Rana.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Chair. I'm looking at 5.2, homelessness and rough sleeping. I just want to know what's actually being done about it, because in the town centre now, there's 2 people I see all the time. They're on the same spot. And just a few days ago, actually, I got a McDonald's for one of them and he didn't want it. He said, no, thank you. And I think he had a couple of cans of alcohol in front of him. And I told him, I said, you do know there's help available, because I think last time we were told that there is help, they can go to open house or something. So why are they still sleeping when, why they're still outside? I mean, I know 2 are regular all the time. I mean, how can we actually persuade them to go somewhere instead of sleeping in the alleyways and doorways? Because it's not good, actually, especially for kids going by and every single day, all night long, they're actually maybe drinking or not smoking. I haven't seen anybody smoking, but drinking I have. And then they got to have something, they want money from people as well, which I think you mentioned once, Peter, because they usually go out and buy drugs. So how can you actually persuade them to go somewhere? Shelter. Thank you, Peter.
I mean, a considerable amount of work has happened during the course of the lockdown to get people housed. Vast amounts of, an open house is critical in terms of getting additional accommodation set up as temporary housing. And then as people, as the sort of lockdown has been lifted, we've been trying to get those people into the system so that they can be moved on and get permanently housed. That isn't always possible with people. A number of people who have subsequently been evicted from housing because they weren't in a position where they could sustain a tenancy. But the realities of homelessness are that it's a very harsh set of conditions to live in, and people don't, very often don't fall into that just by itself. Often there's underlying mental health issues. Certainly if there aren't at the start, then these will emerge over the course of living in what is a very dire set of circumstances, and substance abuse naturally forms part of that. If I was living on the streets, there's no doubt in my mind I would want something that would help take some of the pain away. But that makes it very difficult to then house people, because if you're going to be living in housing, quite often there's a requirement of trying to tackle some of those problems, and quite often the support isn't immediately there. We know that the country's mental health services, are overburdened for what they're trying to do. And it's natural that quite often in terms of NHS funding, it's tended to be prioritised on physical health conditions. But the consequence of that is that mental health services have been undersupplied for dealing with a lot of the problems we face. We do seem to be facing increasing mental health problems as a society, and there are various reasons why that might be the case. But for these people, the end result is that, for some, it makes more sense to live on the street, for the time. If they can generate significant amounts of money. We know that because local people are quite generous, that you can raise significant amounts of money begging on the streets, and so that's why we consistently ask people, do donate to the homeless, but don't do it directly. Donate to Open House, donate to one of the local homeless charities, who can then use that money to engage people, to get them properly housed, to give them the support they need. But if they get the money directly, then often it's not going to be going on things that are going to help them. The reality is, when you talk to a lot of caseworkers, they say people have to hit rock bottom before they realise that they're going to have to change. And quite often they have to go through the cycle several times. You have people who are in, who they work with, who then fall out again, who then go back in the system. It takes a few iterations for it to work. It does work, but it's a very long process. And part of the issue for Crawley has been, because people have been generous, and because we didn't put in place a PSPO which banned homeless from the town centre, it has become an area where we have seen increasing numbers of people moving into the area, trying to access support. And because we've essentially become an area which people know that they can head to. And I don't want to be a town that bans people, because I don't think you deal with the problem that way. You're just pushing it on somewhere else, which is exactly what's happened with these people. But it is very tough, and then trying to deal with the underlying circumstances. And we've got some fantastic housing officers that do work with them, and fantastic people through local charities that go out and meet them every night and talk with them. But it's, it is incredibly tough, the circumstances have been in, and it will take a long time to unpick all of that.
Thank you, Peter.
Councillor Barron.
Thank you, Chair. Well, firstly, if I can just begin by saying, as Peter alluded to, it is a very depressing report, unfortunately, because virtually every service has lost money, either through additional expenditure or reduction in income one way or another. And in fact, going through the report, I think the only saving that I saw we've made as a result of the COVID pandemic is probably the saving on the council election. No, other than that, everything has either been a cost to us or income foregone. I do have a number of detailed questions, if I may. I wonder, Chair, I'm sorry about this, but you knew you wouldn't get away with it, with me here without a few. As they're relating to different things, I wondered, would you be happy for me to do them one at a time and have them answered rather than in one go?
I think that would be good, Richard, if you could do.
Okay. The first one is on 5.3.3, which talks about car parking income, which obviously is about £250,000 down. I really just wanted to clarify, it was the point about, it says Crawley Hospital chose to suspend all pay and display parking until the end of June. I just wanted some clarification on why that would affect us and our income, because I know we run the car parking at the hospital, but my understanding was that we do it on an agency basis and that the money would go to SACH, so therefore we wouldn't actually gain or lose as a result of it not happening. Maybe it doesn't work like that, so I wondered if you explain how it actually works.
No, we're not hired on a retainer to do it or anything like that. It's very much a case of we collect £1, 50 pence goes to them, 50 pence goes to us. That tends to be the system. So their decision to stop charging on those car parks. It's worth bearing in mind that hospital staff didn't tend to use that car park. It was very much patients using it, and the hospital staff were using Orchard Street. That we lost some money on that, but we clearly lost significant amounts on Orchard Street, providing that free parking as well. But it was the right thing to do. I think we all agree.
Yeah, absolutely. It was just that, as I say, I didn't know we retained some of the income. I assumed it all went there, but that explains that. Thank you. That's the first one. The second one, paragraph 7.1.1 talks about delays in the handover of new developments at Forgewood and Bridgefield House, causing a loss of expected rental income, which is understandable, and I guess there may be some smaller schemes as well that are currently building out where we've had to where we've not been able to go as fast as expected for that reason. What I was wondering was, has there been a knock-on effect on the numbers on our housing register? Because obviously we expect to be able to house a certain number of people each year by a new build, and if we're not completing the new build, but obviously we're not losing the same number of tenants, then there could be a knock-on effect. And I just wondered what the effect that it was on the register.
I mean, the register is growing quite significantly. That is less because of the delay, although the delay clearly has an impact, but an impact of a few months. Well, I guess you knock on, and then you have to try and catch up with that. But the big increase, the large increase in the number of people who can no longer afford their current housing as a result of changes to their employment and likely future employment, is resulting in much larger numbers of people applying to join the register. And it is very hard to see how we're going to catch that up, particularly if we're talking about the year's worth of time it's going to take to regenerate a lot of that employment. And when you bear in mind that 75% of the equivalent of everything we build is still being lost in right to buy over the same period. So we build 400 properties, 300 properties get lost to right to buy. It makes it very, very difficult to catch up in terms of supply of council housing.
Okay, thank you. The next one, Chair, was paragraph 8.2 regarding the new town hall, which says the original budget was set before the cash flow had been received from the developer and was based on the finance team assumption. The projections are now more realistic and in line with the project delivery. Could someone explain what that's actually saying? Because I couldn't quite get what it meant.
I'm fairly sure Paul is the person to answer that. Yeah, I'm going to hand over to Paul to address that.
Yes, thank you. Yes, all it is was when the budget was set back in February, we just based our assumptions on what the total build cost was spread over time. But after that point, we got a detailed cash flow from the developers, setting out what the monthly invoicing would look like. So it's just factoring that in, and it's either So I can't remember whether it's brought forward money or pushed back money to next year on that.
Yeah, just to say, you kind of have to model these things until you know what the actual cost and what the actual speed of expenditure is. So it's just that shift from modelling into actuals, from forecast to model to actual. So it's just that difference, and I don't think it was too far out anyway.
Okay, thank you. The next one, paragraph 8.7. A change to the type of rental properties in another development of 15 to 29 the Broadway has meant that the council will not be in receipt of section 106 affordable housing monies for that property. And it then goes on to say what the knock-on effect will be on the Longley House Phase 2 scheme. I wondered if somebody could just explain what that actually means in terms of the change in the type of properties, because obviously when we grant planning permission and a section 106 is made for affordable housing, that's on the basis of what the types of properties that we've given permission for, and I'm not quite sure how that would change without a change to the planning permission.
Yeah, I'm not sure I'm going to be able to answer that really. I mean, I'd assume from what it's saying that there is an assessment of viability afterwards that can still take place. And that they've changed the composition in terms of probably lower value properties, and therefore they're to argue that there's less profit to be made on that that can then go into other housing. But Ian might know better.
It's the mix within the properties and how that's changed and how that affects. So you apply 106 differently to different as well as sizes to different tenure types as well, and because there's been a change as that's come forward and the developers sought I think more affordable, if I remember rightly, but I'm trying to see if Paul recalls that too, then I think that changes the amount of overall 106 that's in the scheme.
Yeah, I think that's right. It's around what the development is, whether there's section 106 monies coming in or not.
Okay, thank you. I suppose that makes sense now, because if the developer is seeking more in terms of affordable housing, that would mean the commuted amount would be less. So therefore, okay, thank you. 8.17, Bridgefield House, talks about £120,000 being drawn down from the contingency budget within the capital programme, and also funding being slipped forward from 2021 to 22. So given that we've had to use the contingency budget for that, is that basically saying that it's gone over budget? And if so, why?
I would assume that's a knock-on effect from the COVID-19 restrictions that have been in place affecting timescales, but I'm afraid I can't give you a definite answer on that. I'd have to leave it to one of the people who drafted the report to answer that. Cool, Ian. Yep.
Yep, thank you. Yes, when we originally set up the contingency, what the idea was to reduce the amount of contingency in our overall budget. So previously what happened was each scheme would come up with their own contingency included in their budgets. And to save money, what we've done is moved all those contingencies to a single line, so that we could draw down on those when they're required. So it's not really gone over budget, it's taking into account the contingency which would have been available anyway to it.
Okay, thank you very much. And the next one, nearly there. 8.18, the Telford Place development. This talks about discussions have yet to reach conclusions, giving further slippage. And I just wondered what the delay with that is, because it's been going on for a very long time. It was being talked about when I was housing, which is well over 6 years ago, and I just wondered what the issue was. But I appreciate if it's something you can't talk about in part A, then I'm happy to accept an email with the detail.
I'll talk about it.
Okay.
I mean, I'm fairly sure Telford Place ended up being bought after you left the role, but I think we all agreed that it was a wise thing to purchase at the time, even though I've got to say some of the land values haven't sort of been as consistent with what we paid at the time. We've been through various sets of issues with Clarion based around their assumptions of what would need to go into the properties, various requirements that get tied up in the Homes England funding to provide the other entrance to the site which weren't in keeping with that. And then there's been a lot of arguments and delays essentially around uncertainty that their board has towards the market moving forward, both in terms of initially Brexit and now coronavirus. And I think we're very much reaching the point where, you know, we have no intention of breaking relations with Clarion, but we will be prioritising other projects until they can get their act together, frankly, because there are more than enough housing opportunities we can focus in on at the moment. But yeah, I haven't got a lot of faith in them right at the moment, based on the way in which they've been dealing with us so far. I'm not sure they're particularly committed to the project, is the long and short of it.
Okay, thank you. Well, that's really helpful to know, but it's obviously very disappointing because it's a major town centre scheme that would have delivered a lot of units. And then finally, on Appendix 2, the capital programme, on page 50, in the section headed Crawley Growth Programme, there's a line headed Town Centre Acquisition with a budget of £6 million for this year, which is expected to be spent this year. And I just wondered if somebody could tell me what that relates to.
I think that's actually for potential future acquisitions. I could be wrong, as opposed to something in particular we're buying. But Karen has just come on there.
It's for a potential acquisition for small businesses to be based around the town centre. A property did become available, which we were looking at, but then it was taken off the market. So we're looking at if we can find an alternative property. With hindsight, we will probably move this budget to next year, but it is linked to funding from the LEP. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much indeed, and thank you for your indulgence, Chair.
Councillor Lanza.
Thank you. Just a few points. And first of all, some comments on 5.3.1, the cabinet area. And this might be a bit of a preemptive comment, but what we see here is a pay settlement of 2.75%, which was a bit larger than we anticipated. But I wanted to make some comments about this because although that seems a large figure when compared to inflation, if you look at the employees covered by this, these are the employees covered by what's called the NJC, National Joint Council Terms and Conditions, where 3 unions represent these workers. That's Unison, Unite and the GMB. Now, if you look over the period April 2010 to March 2020, so excluding this pay rise, then the workers in this group have seen a real term reduction in pay of 22% against the retail price index and 12% against the consumer price index. So I wanted to add that context to this report. We're part of national pay bargaining machinery, which has kept us as an organisation well below inflation, but at the same time has seen real terms reductions in pay. Now, going on to 5.3.5 and the wellbeing portfolio. This understandably is the portfolio that shows the greatest financial hit. But there is a comment here about K2 crawling, and it refers both to the amount of revenue that we've lost and the additional funds that we've had to pay to the contractor. This might be a part of the non-public kind of response that would be required, but I would like more detail as to how we arrived at the figures that we had to, at increased amounts that we had to pay the contractor operating K2 Crawley, because it's quite a chunky sum. And just a final presentational question, it's only minor, but On every one of these quarterly reports up to now, we've had indicators against all the announced variances of F for favourable and U for unfavourable. So you could instantly see what was an unfavourable variance and a favourable variance and home in on it. I just wondered why that presentation had been changed. Thank you.
Yeah, I don't mean in any way to begrudge the workforce in terms of the 2.75%. I mean, you know, we have over various times given Crawley Borough Council staff bonuses and given them an increase in the Crawley allowance that is greater than the pay awards to try and make up for some of that in different years. It's simply just that it was not predicted to be as high as that. And of course, while it is negotiated nationally, it does tend to take place within Treasury limits they tend to establish for public sector staff. So it's not something that's wholly within the hands of the combined Council of Trade Unions and local authority representatives. I can't go into detail about the calculations around the leisure contracts in terms of open session. Very happy for you to talk to Nigel Sheehan about the process that we're going through there. Suffice to say that there are some things in contracts which we're having to agree interpretations of, and this is a problem that is affecting every single leisure provider or council who is a leisure provider in the country, because it's fairly standard things in those contracts. So while the figures may look big, this is not through a lack of effort on the local authority's part to limit its liability. In terms of the variances, I can't explain a stylistic thing, I'm afraid, but I'm sure Paul will be happy to brief you on
that. Thanks, Peter. With regards to Councillor Lanza's comments about the favourable, unfavourable, it's just something we thought we'd try removing this time. We didn't, as finance, we didn't think it added anything, but if members do want to see that back reinstated, we will do in future reports.
Through you, Chair, can I suggest that we do that? I mean, I've had a comment from a colleague on another channel that they found it really useful. So.
Right. If all come in, Councillor Burgess, do you wish to comment?
Yes, I do. I want to echo just what Bob Lanza has just said about the favourable, unfavourable. As a person who doesn't like reading lots of figures, F and U I'm more familiar with from my school days, and I can understand what they mean. But I have a little point about paragraph 7.1.2. It says an increase in council garage accounts and the inability to have keys safely returned to Town Hall for many months has led to an anticipated shortfall of rental income by 41,000. What was the problem about people returning the keys? Okay, and it seems to imply, although it's not written down there, that there are people who do want to use or have garage rentals, even though there are some who clearly want to get rid of their garage because they can't afford it. Can I just have a bit of clarification on that, please? Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Certainly people do want garages, and actually there has been issues with essentially people downsizing and looking for ways of storing their excess stuff as a result of the increasing pressures on their income. The issue has been around safety precautions and the checks which we do on garages, and essentially people can't come into the Town Hall and we're unable to undertake those checks when it comes down to the condition of these things. So we have in essence not been running the garage service in terms of taking new people in over the period of time during the lockdown, and that's had an impact upon our income.
Okay.
It was safety reasons essentially.
Thank you.
Thank you. Does any other members wish to comment before I add my comments? Right. I was also concerned about the cancelled garages, because I thought we had a waiting list for the garages, and I was just wondering, do we insist on deposits for these garages, please, Peter?
I don't believe so. Stand by to be corrected on that, but I don't believe we do charge a deposit.
Well, it may only be a small amount for each garage, but obviously multiplied by the number of garages we've got, it might be worth thinking about. That was a minor thing. My other comment was to say thank you to the finance officers who were in charge of the insurance cover, because that has obviously saved us an awful lot of money, 267,000, if I'm reading this report correctly, 80,000 on the housing and 187 on the general fund. And my question is this a one-off saving because of the town hall, or is this going to be ongoing? Perhaps Paul or Karen would be best to answer that.
I'm very happy to answer that. I have actually just had a message pop up to tell me that apparently part of the reason why we're comfortable not charging a deposit is because we use direct debit as being the main way of doing it, so we can recoup money that way if necessary, and guarantees an income. But yeah, either Paul or Karen would be best placed on the insurance side of things.
Karen, Paul? Paul?
Sorry, which paragraph was it again? Sorry.
Insurance.
It's the
Yep, sorry, the insurance. Yes, it was a tender exercise. It's mostly down to where the market is when we run the renewal. So it's just catching up with premiums dropping over that time.
So do you see this as ongoing saving, because it's substantial, isn't it?
We have a long-term agreement.
So we've locked them into these prices.
Kind of, but the insurers can go back on that long-term agreement if the market changes, and we then have the option of going back out to tender again, or to accept what they've proposed. So it's not a guarantee, but a good indication that's where we're likely to be.
Right. Thank you. Perhaps while you're there, on page 52, we're spending 1.5 million on energy, improved energy. And I'm just wondering what savings are we hoping to make? Major installation energy efficiency, 1.5 million on the housing account. That presumably is going to make the homes more energy efficient for the tenants and not actually give us any saving at all. Or do we get any grants from the government for doing that? No? Okay. I too have looked at the reports and got a little bit confused over the variances. 8.1, we have capital, and the table has underspend, overspend, whereas in fact the under should be in brackets. So I do agree with what both Bob Burgess and Bob Lanza said about just making our accounts perhaps a little bit more layman friendly in describing these variances, whether they're positive or negative. Is that a fair? I don't like to criticise because I know how much work has gone into preparing these figures, and it's the same. I guess it's a technical term slippage, But what you actually mean is move it into the future. But to the layman looking at it, they'd wonder what on earth we were talking about. Sorry, Peter.
I was just going to say that as the report authors are both nodding furiously, I think we can agree that they're very happy to do that. I mean, I do think a certain amount of terminology, I take your point that it's not immediately accessible to people necessarily, but I think these come out every sort of 3 months. I think members will get, get familiar with all of it fairly quickly.
Yeah. Okay. So as I've had my 2 pennies, I think we can move on. So all commission members have now had the opportunity to speak. We will move on to the recommendations as set out in this report. I move that the Commission notes the report and request that the views expressed during the debate are fed back to the Cabinet through the Commission's comment sheet, and ask that the Vice Chair second, please. Councillor Rana, please can you second?
Yes, of course, I second that.
Thank you. Is that agreed, please?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Thank you. The recommendations as set out in the report have been approved. We will now move on to appointments. Items C and D have already been discussed by the OSC at its meeting on the 8th of June. These and the other appointments have been to full council on the 15th of July, and the OSC is asked to ratify and note these. Therefore, I am taking these as procedural unless any member indicates otherwise. I move that the Commission notes and ratifies the following appointments. West Sussex Joint Scrutiny Steering Group, Councillor Tina Balban. B, Council-owned Neighbourhood Parade Scrutiny Panel, Councillors Ayling, Geider, Lanza, Lannan and Peck, with Councillor Lanza as Chair. C, Climate Change Scrutiny Panel, Councillors Hart, Jaggard, Lannan, Pendleton, with Councillor Jaggard as Chair. D, West Sussex Health and Adult Social Care Select Committee, Councillor McElhaney. I ask the Vice Chair to second, please.
Sorry.
Councillor Rana?
Yes, I second that.
Thank you. Those memberships have now been noted and ratified. Right. We now move on to HASC. The last meeting of HASC took place on the 9th of September. Please can I ask Councillor McElhaney, but as Councillor McElhaney is not here, I'd like to inform the Commission that the minutes will be available shortly on the HASC website. Right, forthcoming decision list. The forthcoming decision list is featured on your agenda and also on the Council's website. I will ask the Democratic Services team to list those that have already been referred.
Okay. Thank you, Chair. As just mentioned, all forthcoming decision notices are available on the website, and all councillors receive an email when a forthcoming decision notice is published. It is a councillor's responsibility upon receiving the emails to scrutinise the content and let Democratic Services know should they wish to refer an item to scrutiny. You will see from your agenda which items have been referred, and these are highlighted. The following items have been referred for the 23rd of November OSC, and these go to the 25th of November Cabinet. So the items that have already been referred are the reports for the local plan, the budget strategy, Treasury Management mid-year review, and budget monitoring Q2. If there are any other reports on the list that the Commission wishes to refer, please can you turn your camera on and unmute your microphone to indicate to speak. And when you refer, please can you kindly state your reasons why you wish to refer the report. Can I kindly remind members that, as stated in the Commission, issues that you may wish to take into consideration should include: will the OSC add value? Can the OSC influence and add to the debate? Does the report's proposals go against existing policy? Where else or will the item be considered? And is the referral good use of officer and councillor resources? Is it controversial? And would an informal discussion with the report authors resolve any issues? Thank you.
Councillor Pendleton, please. I believe you wish to ask a question. Or
Thank you, Chair. I was going to say, given the, and it may be the same thing that Councillor Lanza is going to suggest, given the focus on budgets at the moment, that actually I think we should probably see the economic development strategy.
do other members agree this, or does Councillor Lanza also want to comment on this?
Well, yeah, thank you, Chair. Councillor Pendleton is indeed correct with her mind reading there. So yes, I was going to ask for that as well. So.
Yeah, Councillor Burrows, I believe you also wish to speak on this item.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I would agree with both Councillor Lanza and Councillor Pendleton about economic development, because obviously it's a key area of work for this council, even without the COVID. But I also think, and I'm sorry, this is going to mean quite a heavy meeting on the 23rd of November. I think perhaps we ought to look at proposed Article 4 directions regarding change of use from dwelling houses to houses in multiple occupation, because this is an area of work that a lot of members are quite concerned about, a lot of residents are concerned about, and a lot of members do receive quite a lot of complaints from residents about houses in multiple occupation. And if we've got a new policy coming forward on that, I think it might add value for the Commission to see that. So I would like to suggest we look at that one as well.
Right, okay. May I ask if anybody else would like anything else put on, or do we all agree to the both items being added, please? Councillor Burgess.
Yeah, I was just going to say that I agree with Councillor Burrett about the proposed Article 4 directions. What exactly does this mean, and what are going to be the implications for our residents? I wholeheartedly agree with it, and I also think that the economic development strategy should come forward as well, notwithstanding what Richard said about it being a long meeting. But there we go.
But we are in strange times, and
indeed we are in strange times, and they may get stranger. Never mind.
Heather, please,
Yeah, I was going to say, just thank the OSC members for that, and just going back on the query from Councillor Burgess, the information on the website regarding the making of the Article 4, the actual information on regarding the forthcoming decision notice refers to the making of the non-immediate Article 4 directions, removing the permitted development rights for dwelling houses in various locations in Crawley to protect the amenity and well-being of the areas concerned. And I will inform the officers accordingly, but that's the information on the website for the forthcoming decision notice. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you, Heather. Councillor Burgess, would you like to comment?
I think I would still like it to come forward, because I'm not a person who's happy with permitted development, and I never have been. And I want to try and make sure that the houses that we have are for the people who need to be in them. And I've also got some issues about houses in multiple occupation. I think there have been times when that has been subject to abuse in the past, and it's something that I would like to see stamped out. So I think we should have a look at it. Thank you.
May I ask members, does anybody object to these all three reports being added?
Agree.
Two.
Agreed.
Can everybody please
Agreed.
Agreed. I will ask Heather then to add that to the agenda of the 23rd of November. There is no supplementary agenda tonight. Therefore, with the business of the commission concluded, the meeting is now closed at, Councillor Barrett, sorry. You scored a goal in the last second to stop me.
Yes, sorry, I do apologise. I didn't realise Heather was only going to talk about that one. I've got a couple of other points further on the decision list. Sorry. One is with regard to the February meeting, just flagging things up in the future. We have the last 2 quarters flagged up the budget monitoring. Quarter 2 is coming in November. Could I suggest we also flag up the quarter 3 in February, because I actually think during the current financial year and given the situation with COVID, we really need to be looking at all these reports as and when they come forward. The other one was I did have a question that looking back at the minutes of the last meeting and knowing when we looked at this before, that we were going to look at the Crawley Arts and Culture proposition, and that seems to have completely disappeared off the forward plan. So can I ask what's happened to that?
Heather, may I ask you to answer that, or Ian? Ian, can you unmute, please? Your camera is on.
Yes, so as you can imagine, with everything that's going on at the moment, that one's just being paused just because of the sheer amount of business that's happening elsewhere in the council. So it's one to come back to. Okay, thank you.
Are you happy with that, Councillor Barrett?
Well, yes. I mean, obviously we've got the Hall 3 tender coming up, but I'm assuming that's being potentially delayed for the same reason. But yeah, I mean, obviously, I'd like us to see it as and when it happens. But you know, at the moment, if it's slipped due to COVID, then you know, I fully accept the reasoning for that.
Right.
So in terms of the Hawth, there is I mean, we can't put back the deadlines on it. So active consideration on the Hawth is still ongoing. Of course, it's complicated because of where the Hawth is at the moment in terms of its economic operation or lack of. So we're very much in terms of the work that we're having to do with the operator right now, and you've seen some of the figures involved in the Q1 monitoring report, the extension, and also how this is going to operate in the coming months is all part of the same conversation. When we're at the right stage, of course, we'll bring that forward.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Heather, do you wish to comment?
Yeah, all I would say is we can note down if councillors wish to refer quarter 3 or for the February meeting, or in fact anything going to the March meeting. What I would say is we'd have the November meeting coming up, so we've got 2 meetings in November. Obviously we've got one coming, the cabinet one, for the 23rd. So if members will be looking at the forward plan at every OSC meeting. And I would also stress the point that the forthcoming decisions are always available on the website. So if members want to go and look at any time and then just send through any emails that they want to refer. But we would be looking at the forward plan at every meeting. So if we want to refer anything for the February meeting or indeed the March one, then we can do so now. But we will be looking at every forward plan at or forthcoming decision list at every meeting.
Are you happy with that, Councillor Barrett, or do you want me to?
Yes, that's fine.
Yeah.
I was just making the point that I think this year the quarterly budget monitoring, we really should look at all of them, because it has such a major impact on everything else.
Okay, I think I see the logic in that too. So does any member disagree? Well, I think that is carried then, Councillor Barrett. So has anybody else got anything else before I move on? Right, so second time, there is no supplementary agenda. Therefore, with the business of the commission concluded, the meeting is now closed at 2020. So good night, and thank you very much for your comments and time tonight. Good night.
Thank you, Chair.
Good night. Thank you, Chair.
Good night.
Good night.